So welcome everyone. The response to this has been extremely strong and we want to thank all of you on the call for joining. We know the past month or so has definitely brought a lot of uncertainty to our everyday lives and some uncharted territory as it relates to the business world. Everyone seems to be getting and asking very similar questions in regards to happening in the now and really what the future will look like. We're hoping that these sessions can bring some guidance as well as some clarity as we start to navigate this together. With that, as a firm, we really wanted to bring together some unbiased thought leaders in an interactive session to discuss some key points around leadership in this time. This will be the first of a second-part series focused on COVID-19, with this session creating a foundation from a scientific and medical perspective, specifically how the medical response landscape may shape the future business environment we operate in. And the second series next Thursday, bringing Tim Warrington to the forum, who's led a successful business through the Ebola outbreak as CEO and has put together a playbook for crisis management from his time in the military overseeing pandemic responses. For those who do not know me, my name is Danielle Munley. I'm a partner here at HTI. You will also be hearing from CEO and founder Andy Town at the end of the session for some closing remarks. Before we dive in, definitely a few housekeeping items. This will be a 40-minute session end-to-end with plenty of time carved out for questions. We encourage you to use the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen for questions only, and then the chat option next to it if you'd like to wish to interact with other guests. Please note this session is being recorded. So without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce our guest speaker, Sindhura Ganapathy, the Deputy Director of the Global Health Division at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, where he joined in 2012. Sindhura's career has been heavily focused around R&D and has a lot of insight into the biomedical landscape. Sindhura will be providing his personal views as he sees it today, as well as his thoughts on the future. I would also like to welcome Mike Westcott, HTI operating partner and former global head of HR at National Grid, who will be moderating the session. Once again, welcome everyone, and Mike, I'll hand it off here.
Great, thanks Danielle, and big welcome from me to everybody. Thank you for taking the time to join us. So let me just take you through the format of this webinar. The way we're going to run it is I'm going to kick off and ask Sindhura a few questions, and then we're going to sort of run a Q&A session. Now we've got 170 people, which is amazing, on the line, so I'm not going to be able to open the lines up to people, but I've seen the questions you've submitted, and we're going to have questions coming through as we're talking, and I'll do my very best to put those into key themes and sort of get those questions to Sindhura so we can have a great conversation. And as Danielle says, please use the chat, please use the Q&A devices we've got so we can sort of share views and opinions amongst ourselves. So let me kick off. I mean, one of the things I've noticed, I'm sure we've all noticed, there's so much noise, there's so much hearsay, there's so much opinion in the press and the social media. So Sindhura, it is absolutely great to have you as, I think I called you when we spoke earlier, a technical expert with us to sort of cut through some of this. And you nicely corrected me, and you said, well, I'm more of a technical journalist who surrounds myself with experts. And I think that's absolutely great. So we're going to get even more minds on this call. So let me kick off and ask you really a basic biology question about this virus. Can you explain to us what are the key features of the virus? So for example, why has it spread so dramatically across the globe compared to other viruses? And why, for example, is it only fatal to humans?
Yeah, no, thanks, Mike. Hello, everyone. And thanks to Andy, people at HTI for making this happen. You can hear me, right? Okay. Yeah, no, when Andy asked if I would do this, my first instinct was to say no, because I'm not an expert in any one of these single fields. But thinking more about how many people have reached out to me in these days to get a sense of what is actually going on, I felt this is one way I could help by sharing what little I have learned through me being around experts and the privilege of having access to real-time information across these domains. These times of epidemic, it's not one single field, but it's integrating all of this that makes it possible to go through our lives and make physicians. Again, reiterating, this will be my personal view, not of Bill and Melinda Gates Foundations. And another caveat that I'm single parenting a 5 and 7-year-old because my wife is a healthcare worker. I've done my best to occupy them elsewhere, but they can always surprise you. So apologies if I upfront if that happens. To go through some overview of the biology, there is a lot that could be said, and a lot of people on this call would probably know even more. Just things to level set. There's always these two terms, COVID-19 and SARS-CoV-2. COVID-19 is the disease caused by the virus SARS-CoV-2, and there is a reason for having some pre-appointed body to name these so that we can all talk about the same things, and when publish research or coordinate, these things are of importance. And the best analogy is HIV is the virus that causes the disease AIDS. And there is a lot of press about coronavirus, novel coronavirus. This virus is particularly novel strain, but it's not new to us. I am a veterinarian by background, and it's pretty common to have coronavirus causing diseases in both livestock species and in our pets. And a good bit of news there is they are manageable, and some of them have good vaccines. That has some implication for how we think about aspects for this. That gives me hope. And on the reason why we need to be concerned about coronaviruses, which virologists have long been, even before the first outbreak of SARS, that this is very closely watched virus with concern, and predictions have been made a priori that this could happen, is that even in pigs or cattle, in chickens, they cause different disease outbreaks, whether it is respiratory, gastrointestinal, and they cross species because these coronaviruses have the ability to pick up when they jump species, pick up certain features that enable them to jump species, not only jump species, but get hold of there and transmit within that species, which is why we were all watching very nervously whether we will see human-to-human transmission in late December, early January, etc. So that's the livestock side. On the human side, we all have heard about SARS, MERS, and this novel coronavirus. They all point towards bats as the natural reservoirs. And SARS, there is guesswork or some confirmed research, and it came through bats to civets or raccoons, and then to humans, although it's very hard to definitely prove those. And MERS, it's bats through camels and humans, and we're still searching for that intermediary mammal host. As you can see, there's a pattern here. Somehow bats tend to be the natural reservoir for these novel coronaviruses, and there is an intermediary mammals that enable this virus to figure out how to transmit and within mammalian species. And for humans, this is right now so problematic and deadly. One, because it's novel in that we are immunologically naive as a population. And also this virus has the ability, because of its tissue tropism, the types of tissues this affects, and things that we still haven't fully figured out, causes anywhere from 1 to 4% case fatality rate. And that that means 95% or 80% may show very mild to moderate symptoms, which is one way good, but it's the real problem in that they can have symptoms and go around and transmit it. And another thing of note is we as human species are not new to coronaviruses. There are 4 coronaviruses that cause common colds in us, in humans. About 15% of the cold is caused by these viruses. We hardly think about those. And those have implications for how we think about future scenarios. And why we are particularly prone, we still don't quite know whether it is the virus itself causing the disease or whether it is our way we react with immunologically that itself causes the disease. There is a lot of work going on, and with each passing day, we are learning more, and that's going to continue to be updated. I'll just pause here because there is a lot one could speak about here, and we will probably come back to this.
Compared to other viruses we've had, SARS, for example, why has this one spread at the rate it has and had the impact it has? Or is that a misunderstanding?
It's still to be fully worked out, but one of the features that has been previously warned by many virologists, and even you could go back to the TED Talk Bill Gates gave 5 years ago, anytime you have respiratory transmission, that's always problematic, dangerous, because that has very high chances of getting spread from it one to another. The other thing, SARS had much higher case fatality rate. Anytime you have these long incubation period and a big proportion of population that can have very mild cases or asymptomatic cases, are symptomatic, but have a long period of transmission, that's when you have much more challenging scenario because of this connected world. Disease can spread through rapidly. And by the time you see death, you are well past the time of problem, because an average, it's right now, it's about 21 days to see the death. That means a death today is almost about average 21 days behind an infection. And that means you have had 3 weeks of spreading infection. So which is why this virus is uniquely a perfect storm of these kind of features.
Yeah. And we had one of the questions which came in, was submitted, was from Jeff Gray, CEO at Globeware, and he was asking about reinfection. So once people have had this virus, is there a reinfection risk?
Certainly that's a possibility, but one thing that I would like to point out is we still don't quite know, because some of these articles about reinfections are in news. There is a confusion between reinfection and reactivation. Now, I have been infected with the virus, I recovered. Is the virus coming back, or did I get reinfected? Those are hard to disentangle. And also there are some confounding factors in that when you are using diagnostic tests at some rate, it's going to give false positive, false negative results. So if your first test was false positive and your second test, you got it right, then you're likely to think, oh, it's a reinfection or a reactivation, while it was just the first time you got a false positive. So that is a question actively being looked at, and we will learn more on how likely are to be reinfected within a certain period, and what are likelihoods that the reinfection is going to be just as dramatic as the first one. Which generally, once we are exposed, there is a period of there is a period of immunity. For this, we don't exactly know what is that period. But in general, we tend to respond much more mildly the second time than the first time.
Mm-hmm. So don't put all our eggs in the basket on herd immunity, for example, which at some stage was being lauded as the great answer to this.
Oh yeah, let me just address that herd immunity. That's a concept and it's not a strategy. For herd immunity to be a strategy, you're looking at many months or year of time period for it to take hold, because you have to have large population fraction to be infected and go through that, and many millions of deaths. One, directly because of the coronavirus, secondary effects because you overwhelm the health system and other causes of disease, deaths, and that's very well known, especially during Ebola time. More people died of measles and malaria in these places than Ebola, because health system was shut down. So herd immunity is not on the cards. We can take it off the table as a strategy.
Okay, so Sindhura, could we then move on to some of the interventions now around to take us through and hopefully out of this virus. And, you know, there's so much news around antibody testing and all the other types of testing. And then I guess the holy grail is around the vaccine itself. But it would be great to get your view on those particular interventions and when you think they're going to come into play and the impact they're going to have.
Yeah, no, I just put one slide together so that people can look through some of these categories that can come. So I'll just try to project and see if people can see it. Can you see it now?
Yep.
Yeah, so basically our armamentarium of interventions outside of social distancing, hard, painful lockdown, that's one we have in hand. Other than that, things broadly fall into these 3 or 4 categories. The first one being diagnostic. And diagnostics can come in a couple of flavors. One is testing the viral nucleic acid material, which is what you're seeing mostly right now. And the good news there is, well, the problem is we still are testing nowhere near how we need to, and lots of news articles have addressed that. But the good news there is there are more, the more 40 diagnostic tests of this nature either already come to market or coming to market. And this is something we know how to do. And I feel quite optimistic in our capability to get up to the scale we will need in the short term, at least in the rich world. The resource poor world, that's a different question. I'll come back to that. That will help with a number of things that in terms of having a good handle on where we are in terms of the disease, what proportion of the population is showing up with symptoms, and how the disease is spreading, that is at a population level, as well as at an individual level. What do you do with that patient you have in front of you? And we will see all kinds of different, tests which have turnaround time in a matter of few hours to days, and they all have different advantages and disadvantages, but they all are complementary. We need many of them, and we will see a different scenario, say a few weeks from now, a couple of weeks from now. The other type of diagnostic you have a lot in the news is, can this antibody test be our ticket out of this issue? They are now that means talking about 2 things there. That means when we have seen the virus, our body produces immunologic response, and one of that is antibody. And one is, can you just do these serologic tests, which will tell, has this person been exposed? And there are many tests that are coming to market in that type, which is something we have done in the past and know how to do. There will be some time to scale up that test up. But what people have in mind when they are talking about antibody test is a secondary hypothesis, in that if I see those signatures, that means how likely I'm going to be protected, right? That's what the key question right now. And those, I just want to caution that we don't yet know. More work needs to be done in terms of how long will we be protected with exposure, and what kind of signature provides that protection. And once we know that, you develop tests that detect those signatures, and there is a time period lag between doing that fundamental research, developing the diagnostic, scaling that to millions and millions you need. So those are not going to be a matter of days. They will take some time. And you also don't want to have false positive things there, in that you show up and get it wrong.
Yeah. Which tests are going to be, I was looking at those tests and thinking that's got to be helpful for people returning to the workplace and understanding about, is that I'm still assuming that's correct assumption, is it not?
That's right. So yeah, I mean, if we are able to figure out which signatures offer protection for a period of time, then those kind of tests will be helpful for in the short term, in the short to medium term, before we have other solutions that I can go through. The next one is on the treatment side. Right? So there, I'm quite hopeful about this category for the medium term, where I would put it. Lots of trials are going on, dozens of clinical trials now, largely in the category where I put as repurposed in quote. Meaning you don't want to start with a new molecule that has to go through many hoops before it can be produced at scale, millions of doses. That's a long period. So could we, in the short term, there are many, more than 10,000 molecules that have gone through some level of human safety testing, and people have, industries have figured out how to make it, all of that. And those are being screened, and some of them are already in human trials. So starting from in a few weeks, a month to 2 months, you will start readouts from those. And you want to have properly conducted clinical trials to actually put your hopes, because many of the news articles you see are humanitarian uses, and those are hard to use as data from that doesn't give you definitive information on, okay, I can scale this up to all settings. You want clinical trials.
Like cures for arthritis, which are currently on the market, they can be adapted and be used to treat in treatment for C19?
That's right. So many of these, when I mentioned repurpose, these are drugs for different indications. They might have effect on the virus or on the host, us, how we fight the virus. So all of these are being screened in different settings, and tried. Those successful ones are being tried in humans. So this, to me, this is one, if we are successful in a matter of a couple of months in preventing deaths, we will look at this pandemic differently, right? The fear is now not getting some cold and staying home, sneezing. It's that fear of death.
But this can slow the mortality rate down, whilst you're going to talk about the ultimate goal.
Yeah. So
enough.
Yeah, that falls into category of prevention, where you have antibodies, which is can you take the survivors' plasma and enrich them and use that for some frontline workers, etc., which is hard to scale, but then also produce these monoclonal antibodies at scale, which is more in the medium to long term, many months away from now. Then comes the vaccines, which is more 12 to 18 months time scale, which is what currently being projected. Lots of effort happening here. More than 50 candidates are being tried, all the way from ones that are completely untested, like mRNA, but they have other advantages of being able to scale more rapidly, to traditional inactivated or subunit vaccines. All of them are being tried, as you should, and I remain more hopeful about this because people who know about this a lot more than I do seem hopeful that this target is it's a reasonable target one could expect vaccine for. And as a veterinarian, having precedence from efficacious vaccine animals gives me hope. And the last part is digital strategies. That's one doesn't get talked about a lot. Quite a remarkable pace of innovation happening there in terms of contact tracing, population level, disease tracking, and you name it. And Bayesian diagnostics, just until last few weeks, we didn't know that loss of sense of smell is something that happens in about 60% of the cases. Knowing that helps a lot in narrowing down. And these are much more scalable strategies in the near term. While these are useful for rich world, for especially Africa, India, and such settings where even these diagnostics are going to be out of reach for a long period, these digital strategies are going to be quite, they're way out of this very near-term painful lockdown.
Yeah. I was just reading some of the questions coming in, Sindhura. There was one from Jay asking about your views on the almost no lockdown approach in Sweden. I mean, is there any medical science behind that, or is that them kind of winging it?
I think one thing we know is complete lack of lockdown leads to wild spread of the disease and very serious vertical peaks and then overwhelming the health system. And even these places, they're not. These places have always, Sweden and all of these they always stop at the number one in terms of their all kinds of indices, right? So we should also take that into context on their health system preparedness and the way people are attuned to that and changing their own behavior, even without complete lockdown. Even their social distancing measures are in effect in terms of advice, and human density is of variable levels compared to, it's not New York. So, and the testing is at a different level. So all of those need to be taken into consideration. So there is no one single answer, but one thing we know for sure is without saturating the system with enough testing and some level of social distancing, you can't really ease the lockdown very quickly.
Right, thank you, Sandra. Can we move to the sort of future scenarios, both economic and the return to work, which I know is going to be huge interest to everybody on the call, and your thoughts around those scenarios, both economic and the workplace. And, just to kick things off, on the workplace one, we have some great questions submitted to us ahead of time. And I'll just read out a few of them just so you get a flavor of it. Sunil Sanara, CFO, Good Catch Foods. How should businesses plan to bring back operations in a safe manner? David Busby, is it possible to test people quickly that co-workers can feel comfortable being in the same workplace? Struan Robertson, Biotechny. After the lockdown, how will our physical working environment change? Will we have to maintain social distancing? And Brian Gurin from Calvert Street Partners, when it will be safe to travel, to meet face-to-face, to go to trade shows, and what will be the role of testing, etc. within that. So there's this, the guidelines we're going to get, we know are going to be guidelines, and there's going to be a lot of scope for CEOs to have to interpret those guidelines and what they believe is the safest and most economic thing to do. So on how the hell we navigate that.
Yeah, lots of loaded questions there and have immediate ramifications for this group. I'll share one quick, there are lots of graphs out there. This is one I have found useful tracking because it's aggregating some of the information from Financial Times. What you see here is on the y-axis, logarithmic scale of cases, the new cases, and over the days, how things have changed. As you see, most countries are following very similar patterns. Very rapid rise that is consistent with a contagious disease of this nature, and then very stringent lockdowns happening at varying levels, and a peak and a decline. And the good news is you can look to some of the countries that have already seen it to expect what you might expect in different settings that are still early on. And people can go into this. I can share the link afterwards. This is one article. There are a series of 3 articles from this author, Thomas, I can't quite pronounce his last name. It's done a very nice job articulating this, and it's also grounded, where you see different scenarios, right? So most of the settings we now are living in, can you see my cursor? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So we are either somewhere at the peak, or some few countries have started to see the decline from previous graphs, and many are here. And it's also not countries. Within US, you can point to different states that are at different levels here. And what you see is we are in this hammer phase, stringent lockdown, getting our bearings together, getting our healthcare system to handle personal protective equipment to the levels we need. getting the testing up to the level you need, all of that. And that requires some time. It's not going to be ready in a week. But I am quite hopeful that, you know, in a few weeks, we can see us saturating, at least here in US and European settings, rich world, saturating that with testing, you know, lots of different options, home kits, a kiosk you could go to get a test, and a drive-through testing, all of those, you know, you need all of those. That will change how you think about giving options to people who are showing symptoms. And to answer one specific question there, that's going to be a next few weeks is going to be that period of adjustment and getting all of the system in place. Then comes this period of dance until we have durable solution, where you are going to be having to continually test and having some physical distancing measure in place. Very unlikely you can have large gatherings, and it's going to be a dance in that we will get some things wrong. You will see infections come back. You have to be adaptive to bring it back on. The restrictions are contact tracing, quarantine. All of those will be a dynamic adjustment to this period where we have controlled it, we have some bearing, but we have no durable solution. Yeah. And there is going to be some seasonality. We know it from past flu epidemics, etc. From fall and winter, it may come back, and we have to be quite vigilant. All of that's only possible if you have very good testing. Then you know that, okay, we are not, you know, we are doing too much or too little. And that's going to be the dance period we will all be living in. And as much as I want, it's unlikely to be this end of close down is unlikely to be dramatic in that, you know, we will all come out of the house, whew, that was bad, you know, hug our neighbors, go to the bar. I wish that was the case, but unlikely to be that's the case. The main reason is world is going to be at different phases at any given time. Right, so, and this being, you know, some countries will be in this dance period, some other settings will likely to be in this peak again, or on this steeper part. And in this being an infectious disease with this connected world, infectious disease anywhere is infectious disease everywhere.
So that's a really interesting point, and I'm conscious we've got probably a few more minutes left, Sindhura. So I want to ask two more themes which have come through very strongly on the questions, if I may. One is around future pandemics and prevention. And I'll just call out a couple of the questions which have come in. JD Stinton, CEO at CTC Global Corp, has asked, do you expect the frequency of pandemics to accelerate in the future? Whitney Rockley, managing partner at McRock Capital, do you think COVID-19 will recur each year like other coronaviruses? Barry Stoddard, professor at Fred Hutchinson Cancer Research Center, how do we prevent new spikes in 2020 and 21? So, yeah, if you could give us that, would be great.
Yeah, no, lots of really good questions. Short answer for whether we will see it more, absolutely. And this has been predicted from virologists, epidemiologists, people who research this for a long time. And it's a function of increased human-animal interface that's happening across the world in different settings. Deforestation, my own village back in southern India, there is a particular novel virus that comes from monkeys to humans via ticks, and it's spreading its footprint each year. Gives me lots of concern, and very few people even know about it. Changing climate that adds to this, and our global connectedness. So all of this definitely point towards this will not be the last time we see an epidemic, a pandemic, and probably not even for coronaviruses. The other question, sorry.
So I mean, in a way, you've answered it, because I mean, a lot of us hopefully were thinking, we'll learn from this and we will crack it. We have vaccines for anything which comes in the future. And unfortunately, then that's not the case. And therefore, my kind of last theme really is lessons learned. So what lessons learned can we take so far? And I appreciate its evolving picture with more information coming out on a daily basis. But a couple of great questions came in. Raphael Valdivia, Vice Dean of Science at Duke University School of Medicine, has asked, are there lessons from COVID-19 that academia should learn in terms of how they perform research or train the future workforce? And Grant Greatrix, Managing Director of McSee Group, do lessons learned from COVID-19 crisis require new role for, very topical this, WHO and NGOs in preparing for and managing pandemics? And there was a question which came online about how much global response do we need in times like this to really defeat it versus taking a very much a sort of internal country by country approach. So maybe in the last minute or so, sorry to rush you, could we just finish your thoughts on that? Would be terrific.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's a very interesting question what biomedical sciences could do. Definitely on the education side, universities, since I'm a veterinarian, I constantly think of integrated approaches. That's something that definitely there is one side on the education on how to broaden the horizon of medical education, grounding them more in epidemiology, modeling, Bayesian thinking, One Health aspects, all of this, I think is definitely something universities could think about, and that would definitely help. And on the research side, we have to have change from top of mind research where we have funders, whether it is philanthropic or government, universities, and publishers of research articles have a role. Now, when Ebola was at peak, that was on top of mind for all, a lot of researchers. Ebola went away, and funding and interest in that type of publishing has gone down. The problem with that approach is by the time it is top of mind, that means you have lost a lot of time. So you probably have to spend time preparing for these. And one of the effort in terms of what we could do differently, there are two buckets. One is resource intensive, and the other one is probably less resource intensive, less price tag, but still quite important. The price tag one is listing all the potential pathogens, which is what the CEPI, that coalition is doing, and preparing for various categories, whether it is working through some of those viral structures, having some assays done, having different categories, diagnostics, antivirals, and vaccine candidates brought to certain level and keeping that ready, especially for vaccines, manufacturing capabilities to some level ready to go so we can start much faster next the epidemic hits. The less price tag one is also, that's really important in that big letter there, word is there is coordination, global, national, local. It's a lot of time gets spent in terms of even just at local level. There is testing capacity in universities, and they have certification, but they can't really do that because hospital software interface doesn't work with that. Those things are workable, and we are able to solve that, and having broad framework in terms of these crises. How do we work through these regulatory barriers and frameworks for how diseases, how vaccines get distributed, drugs get, all that could be put up front so that we are prepared. And that shouldn't cost a lot of money, but it's coordination.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'm conscious of time. I did promise people, be respectful of their time, we'd finish around about now. But before so, I do want to, first of all, thank you hugely for taking your time. And I feel we've sort of scratched the surface, and we could have carried on for a lot longer. So, but thank you. And yeah, from everybody on the call, really, really appreciate you taking time out to be with us. So yeah, heartfelt thanks for that.
And thank you, and a lot of respect for what you all have to do, which is real-time decision making that has consequences for business and people. So best luck to all of us.
Thanks again. So let me hand over to Andy just to close for us.
Andy's muted.
Andy, I think you need to get off mute.
I did, thanks, Mike. I do, Sindora, thank you, but I do want to address just one question that has come up, and it's in the Q&A chat, and it's been It's certainly been a topic over the last 24 hours, but this is from Rick S. from Leading Edge Crystal, CEO. We've looked at China for hints of things to do and not to do with C-19. What if they are dramatically underreporting cases and deaths? Could we be making bad decisions based on reported numbers?
You want me to address that?
Yeah, I think it's on everybody's mind right now, so I think it's worth discussing quickly before we get into summarizing.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is definitely some of the challenges with modeling folks is that across the board we have underreporting because death is very small, and one death today could be as high as 800 cases because it's 21 days average to report. A good thing is we have now data from different settings, not just China. That variable went into the modeling and people came up with scenarios. And then we have data from, Italy, New York, various settings. Hopefully all of these are being shared in real time, which improve our modeling. So if we were solely focused on our modeling and projections, one setting from China, that would be problematic because of variety of reasons, including whether it's applicability into different settings. I feel much better now that this variety of inputs into the modeling, you have seen even IHME, which puts out modeling, which was shown in White House in the projections for deaths in US, dramatically changed over the period as they got new data from settings in Italy, settings in US,
right,
of different settings. So yes, that is definitely a concern, but these additional settings data give me much more hope and confidence.
Great. Well, thank you again. I greatly appreciate your insight and participating in our webinar. And I want to thank Mike as well for moderating. Michael Naylor, who was essentially our director to prepare, and Danielle Munley and Brandy Paul. But also want to thank everybody for joining. Our vision behind this session and the next one next week is to utilize our relationships to bring a platform to people for information, unbiased information, where you can get data, and all of us are going to be faced with some really critical decisions coming up over the next couple of weeks, likely over the next 30, 60, 90 days that are going to impact businesses, going to impact human beings and health, and we wanted to bring a platform for everybody to come together, and we appreciate all of the questions that were put forth. So many great questions, and we're disappointed we couldn't address all of them. Hopefully we'll, in the second part of the series next week, as we get into beyond the science and start to get into the playbook and best practices for moving forward in a pandemic crisis with Tim next week, that we'll be able to address some of the other questions as well. So we'll get everybody information on signing up for next week. Everybody that participated and those who couldn't. Michael Naylor, our chairman, will host next week. And again, we appreciate everybody participating, and wish everybody a safe and healthy day, and best of success with decision making. But thank you all.